Right, lot to pack in this evening, so I am going to whiz through this. This is about Stanley Kubrick and the moon landing conspiracy theory. One thing that conspiracy theorists almost universally agreed on is that Stanley Kubrick was the man who directed the fake film footage. And there's so many problems here with it, not just from a logical point of view, but I can actually prove, yes, prove that Kubrick could not have directed the Apollo 14 and 15 missions, which I'll get to later on. So the story goes is that Kubrick, who made this fantastic science fiction film in 1968 called 2001: A Space Odyssey, you may have heard of it. The special effects are so good, and he is such an obsessive, meticulous director. He must have been the person that NASA went to make the fake film footage. A lot of problems with this one. First of all, the most obvious one is that the footage that you see of the moon in 2001: A Space Odyssey doesn't really match what is seen in the Apollo footage. The most obvious difference is that Kubrick's depiction of the moon is very much like how people thought of the moon's surface before they started landing probes and sending moon missions to it. So it's very craggy, the rocks are very jagged, and it looks more like the kind of artistic paintings of what the moon's surface might have been like that were in magazines like Forbes or Scientific American throughout the 50s and 60s. It's this jagged, rugged, universally blue-grey colour. Whereas in reality, the greys varied in hues, and because of millions of years of micrometeoroid bombardment, the hills and the mountains of the moon are quite smooth. So it seems very strange that NASA hires Kubrick because he's done such a fantastic job with the special effects, and yet what he ends up producing for NASA doesn't look anything like what he's been hired for. It doesn't look like his calling card. The other thing, you only see astronauts walking on the moon twice in 2001. Once when the shuttle is landing, you see some astronauts on the moon's surface, and also when they go and investigate the monolith in the crater, Dr. Floyd and his team, you see them walking there. In neither sequence are they moving consistently in a 1/6 gravity. They're walking normally in a 1g gravity. They're not walking in 1/6. The walk of the astronauts in those two sequences does not match the walks and the hops that we see from astronauts in the Apollo footage. So this is strange that NASA have hired Kubrick because on the strength of 2001, and yet they're not. He's not producing anything that's consistent with his calling card. So this leads to another issue. When was Kubrick hired? Because we've got, in my previous video, I discussed the problems with the timeline of the conspiracy theory. So if the conspiracy began in 1961, why have they waited all this time to hire Kubrick? They hired Kubrick less than 2 years before they land a man on the moon. Is that enough time to bring him up to speed, to get everything ready, to get the whole look of film? Kubrick actually started making 2001 in 1964. That's when he and Arthur C. Clarke got together to write the story, and then he started mapping out how he wanted to do the film. The first scene of 2001: A Space Odyssey was shot in December 1965. That's the scene I mentioned before, where the astronauts are walking in the crater to have a look at the monolith. Principal photography took place between 1966 and 1967, and then they spent just over a year in post-production with the special effects and everything else. So it took him 4 years to make 2001: A Space Odyssey. And then if he's hired because of 2001: A Space Odyssey, it doesn't give him much time to completely come up with a new idea for presenting the moon. So why is he hired? I mean, you could have hired any number of Hollywood special effects technicians, not necessarily a big name. Why not, say, George Powell, for instance? George Powell made his name making science fiction films in the 50s, most notably Destination Moon or Conquest of Space. certainly knew his way around a science fiction set. Why not get the people who did Forbidden Planet? That was cutting edge at the time. Why are you hiring Stanley Kubrick and giving him such a short working time? And who's Stanley Kubrick's crew? We'll talk about Stanley Kubrick. He didn't do this on his own. Who was the director of photography? Who was the editor? Who was the set designer? Who was the sound recordist for the astronaut chatter? Who wrote the script? Film crew is a large entity. Who are these people? And remember, Kubrick had a fear of flying. So from 1962, when he made Lolita in the United Kingdom, he stayed in the United Kingdom effectively for the rest of his life because of his fear of flying. So he almost exclusively used British film crews. So is the British film industry on the conspiracy as well? It's where I find the whole Kubrick thing, the argument that he directed it, falls apart, because if you start asking questions about how it was done, like a lot of things with the conspiracy theory, it falls apart. So here's the bit where I'm going to prove that Kubrick could not have directed Apollos 14 and 15, and it's quite an obvious one if you know anything about Stanley Kubrick's career, and that is A Clockwork Orange. He made A Clockwork Orange in 1970. He started filming A Clockwork Orange in September 1970, and that photography went from September through to April 1971, and then from April 1971 to December 1971, he was editing it. And how do we know this? Because online, and I'll try and leave a description if I can find the website again, but it has the shooting. I found online the shooting schedule for A Clockwork Orange, and February 1971 was when Apollo 14 took place. And at the same time, Kubrick is in South London filming A Clockwork Orange, so he can't be in two places at once. You got the schedule. You can find out where Kubrick was on any day during the filming of A Clockwork Orange. And he was editing. There's a second website which is an interview with A Clockwork Orange editor. And he said that the moment it stopped filming, they worked every day for months on editing that film. Because it's Stanley Kubrick. He's meticulous and obsessive, remember. So every day from April through to December, just a few weeks before the film was released, he was working on editing. Apollo 15 happens in August 1971. Again, he can't be in two places at once. Or are you calling everybody who worked on A Clockwork Orange a liar and that they're in on the conspiracy? A British film crew? Right, go and find Malcolm McDowell. Ask him if he can remember Stanley Kubrick bunking off from directing A Clockwork Orange. No. So it falls apart. But a sharper person might say, what if he filmed the sequences before he started filming Clockwork Orange? Okay, let's examine that. So filming starts in September 1970. But you don't just make a film on that day you start filming. You have months of pre-production. The budget for Clockwork Orange was approved by Warner Brothers. The project was greenlit in late 1969, around about the time Apollo 12 was happening. So that's when Clockwork Orange was approved for filming. So Kubrick then went into pre-production, the design, the script, the casting, the rehearsals, all this pre-production. And if you've ever worked on a film set, that is consuming. When you make a film, it consumes your life. So he can't. That would rule him out of directing Apollo 13. Not that there's much film footage of Apollo 13. There's one televised sequence just before the explosion happened. And so that leaves him with Apollos 11 and 12. Can I prove that Kubrick wasn't involved? No, I can't. But it seems odd that they're the two least interesting missions to watch. Apollo 12, only a few minutes into the moonwalking on Apollo 12, Alan Bean picks up the TV camera and accidentally points it at the sun and fries the electrics. There's not much to see. And Apollo 11's all very grainy, black and white, because they didn't put much effort into camera. Just basically a black and white TV camera that worked, that could transmit a signal. And they weren't looking at the quality. So why would you hire Stanley Kubrick for that? Doesn't make sense. Anyway, maybe you've got an answer. please comment below, and until next time, bye.